Hello, chess fans. Are you stuck below 500 elo and you desperately need to get higher? Well, here are 5 chess straps that can help you do that. The first one is very common, known as the scholar's mate. It goes e4, e5, queen h5. Now, if they protect with this knight, you go bishop c4, and if they decide to attack your queen, you deliver a checkmate on f7, which is checkmate in 4 moves, and it's one of the most common early level chess traps. Now, if they decide to attack it with the g-pawn going g6, you can simply take their e-pawn, forking the king and the rook. And no matter what they block with, you will win the rook. Well, now what if they go here? Same tactic. You go here, and they block, and you're just up a pawn in the early game. Now, what if they go knight c6? You still go bishop c4, but they decide to attack your queen with their pawn. Then you simply slide back to f3, still maintaining that threat. And after this, which is the most common move, you'll just play standard developing moves, constantly keeping a threat on the f7 pawn. Okay, so here is trap number 2. This comes from one of my favorite openings that I used to play when I was below 1000, and it's still very strong at above 1000. e4, e5, knight at f3, knight c6, and bishop c4 begin the Italian game. This opening is very strong at low elo, and is still very strong at high elo, even played by professional grandmasters and international masters. Even played by the 2 best chess bots, AlphaZero and Stockfish. If they go knight f6, which is the most common move, played over 27 million times, you go knight g5, the fried liver attack. Now they have a multitude of options after this, but d5 is the best move. Now, if you want to know why, it's because if they move to, say, somewhere like d6 or bishop e7, you fork the queen and the rook. Hence why d5 is forced. Now you take with your e-pawn, and they have to take back with the knight, since they don't want to lose their own knight. Here, you take the f7 pawn with your knight, similar to the wayward queen attack, and then you deliver a check on f3 with your queen. Now, the idea of the fried liver attack is very similar to the scholar's mate and the main ideas of the wayward queen. If they decide to hide their king in the corner, you simply take the knight with either the queen or the bishop, and it results in forced checkmate. Now, if they don't decide to hide their king there and they decide to move to e7 or e8, you simply take the pawn and maintain pressure on the f7 square. But if they realize that these 3 squares are bad, and they decide to play the best move, which is king e6, you keep on maintaining pressure, putting pressure onto the pinned piece, which is right now the knight. Now, after this, you play the game on your own, but you have this massive material advantage, being up 2 points of material because you have their knight and they have one of your pawns. But if they decide to go somewhere like knight bd4, you just continue, like, you take the pinned knight, and you just continue with massive threats. So like there could be a possible continuation. I don't know what's after that. But that is the fried liver, one of the most common and one of the most powerful early game chess traps for low elo. Number 3, but this time we're with the black pieces. D4, and you play one of my favorite openings for black, which is E5, the angle and gambit. Although this opening isn't necessarily a gambit in the traditional sense where you sacrifice material in order to get a massive advantage, this is more or less a trade of pieces where it's just a battle for the e-pawn. So after d4, e5, d takes e4, e5, sorry, and knight c6, they protect it with their knight, you attack it again with your queen, and then they protect it with the bishop. Now you play one of the strongest moves in chess, queen b4. Now this is strong because it essentially forks 3 pieces: the bishop, the king, and the b2 pawn. If they decide to protect it with the knight or even this pawn, you simply win their bishop. But if they decide to protect it with their queen, you get to move here and attack their rook, potentially winning it. Now if they do something like this, trying to counter it and win the rook back, you have bishop b4, which is a very dangerous pin. Now, if they play the best move, which also happens to be part of the main line, bishop d2, you still take this pawn, hoping to win the rook, and then they go bishop c3, hoping to win the rook back and also your queen. Well, here, like in the last continuation, you play bishop b4 check. Not check, bishop b4. Essentially counterpinning the opponent's bishop. Now if they protect it with the queen, which is one of the best moves, second most common move actually as well, played a lot, you take the bishop, and if they take it with the knight, you take their rook, and then they essentially lose a rook and a knight instead of just a rook. So they will most likely take with the queen, and here you deliver queen c1 checkmate. Now here's another trap with this same opening, except this time you go bishop c4, they still go knight f3, and then you sacrifice a pawn, another pawn, sorry, and then your knight, which after then you also sacrifice a bishop. But if you saw this, congratulations, you get to skewer their queen and essentially win it. Now you're attacking multiple things, and their king is very open, and you can start a massive attack on it. So that is trap 3 and 4, using the black pieces. Here is our last and final chess trap, and this is with the black pieces. This chess trap isn't as good as the other ones, but it's still very powerful. Still, again, comes from the Italian game, except this time you go knight d4. Now, if they take your pawn, which just so happens to be that if you move here, you remove protection from this pawn. You go queen g5. Now, this kind of helps your opponent, where in the sense that they attack these two in order to try and win either your rook or your queen, and moving there doesn't change anything. But little did they know that this would essentially lead to a checkmate. After you take the g2 pawn, they can either just lose, they can